Well, thrilled to have Dani as our third presenter today. Dani is a pastor and works at University Presbyterian Church. I got to know Dani when she was at Union Church. It's just called Union Church, right? Which is a church plant of University Presbyterian Church in South Lake Union. And Dani came on staff at UPC and works a lot with Godly Play curriculum and cares a lot about ministry to families. So I asked Dani to kind of share with us from her perspective as a minister, as a mother of three, as a woman working a lot with children and families. Tell us a little bit more about how do we engage, how do we cultivate and support ministry to families so that children, we can support and nurture environments where children get to have conversation with their parents about this, where it's not just the expectation that there's a blank slate that kids come into for maybe an hour on Sunday every other week or once a month or something for us to pour into them, but tell us a little bit more about what you're learning and your thoughts there.
We've had a lot of really good, rich conversations, so I'll try to just make it as brief as possible. So one of the things that I find really interesting and that I've been engaging more lately, and maybe you have ideas about this, is that the word family is kind of fraught with some traps that are a little uncomfortable. And I first encountered this, I spent a year working in South Africa, and I'm still very connected with the church that I worked with there. And they've created a position that they're calling a youth pastor. And so I was talking with the senior pastor about this position, and as we talked more and more about it, I said, well, it sounds like you're really looking for somebody who's a minister to families. Why are you calling it a youth pastor? And he said, well, we can't use the word family here because the word family is too complex. Because of all of the cultures that, South Africa has 9 national languages. It has this is a very diverse church. And so the ways in which families are formed are very different than the ways that we experience family here in the United States. And even as the face of sort of the family landscape changes here, it's just one of those things that I wanted to bring to our context here and thought, this word family is getting a little bit difficult. I did some research on the word family just to I was wondering about it, and it turns out that the word family is sort of linked back to a Latin word, which is linked to the word slave, but it doesn't mean that the family is a slave. It just means that this was a way of grouping a household, and the household included all of the slaves within your household. And so as you grouped this familia, or the Latin is less Italian than that, but anyway, you were just basically numbering the people for which you were accountable for, and the man was sort of being the head of this group of people, and that was the family. And that word has sort of, changed and taken on many interesting, different contexts. It was in the 1920s that the word family started to become more linked to this whole idea of roles. Before the 1920s, according to Wikipedia, so this isn't like strong research, before the 1920s, it was more common for children to sort of be within the context of the neighborhood, for both parents to be within their place of work, and for family to be a little bit looser. After that, families became more nuclear. And that's the context that we're living in now. So when we think about all these ideas of family values, and what it means to be a family, that's really only modern American thinking. And I find that to be really interesting when we think about what we do, especially what we do as family ministry, because what I hope that we do is not something that just sort of provides a trump card for this modern American construct. But instead, what I hope that we can do is sort of reach into the history of what family means, sort of more of that ancient idea of what it means to be a family. Chap Clark has also, you're probably familiar with Chap Clark and his research through the Fuller Institute, and he's done all of the sticky faith stuff. And he had these same questions. And one of the things that he noticed was that in the Old Testament, there's actually no sort of word for family. There's a word for household, but there's not really a word for family. And he said, you know, as you get into the New Testament, one of the words that you find for what it means to be a part of the community of faith is this word adoption. And that's kind of that theological word for what it means to be brought into the family of God, not into the family of a man and a woman and their nuclear children, but to be brought actually to be adopted into the household of Christ, right? So that's, I mean, and of course he's working with lots of cultural images that they all would have known. They all would have known that, like, there was the head of a household and you were brought in. And I mean, so it's an image that worked within that culture for sure. But I also think that it gives us a theological framework to say that, you know, family ministry is bigger than just the man and the woman and the children that come from them biologically. It's much, much bigger than that. One of the challenges that I've had recently is that, you know, somebody within my organization had sort of questioned, why do we even use the word family? You know, it's fraught with all of these traps, and single people feel very off put by this word family. And I sort of struggled with that for a bit, and I thought, you know, the problem that we have right now in children's ministry, as far as I can see, is that if we get rid of the word family, what we're stuck with is simple children's programming. And that's why I still advocate for the addition of the word family in children and family. It's not because of sort of the trump and the success of family values. It's because we, family within the context of children and family ministries gives us a context to be able to say children do not grow up in a vacuum. They don't grow up as beings that just need our information, but they grow up within the context of human relationships. And those human relationships form them from the time that they're born. And so we do children and family ministries because we want to recognize the fact that children are relational beings, not because we want to advocate for family values. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with family values, but I just want to make it bigger than that because I think that we can get stuck. So there's that piece. The second thing that I wanted to highlight is that I recently went to a conference that was actually put on by the PCA, but it was Bifrost Arts, and maybe some of you have heard of it. But anyway, there was a man there at the conference who had just done this research project, which was really interesting. And he works. He had done it in New York, and he had researched children ages birth to 3. So that was the age range of the research project. And what he discovered was that it's within that age range that most of the marks of success are determined, unfortunately, within the realities of our culture. So within birth to 3, the amount of vocabulary that kids learn by the time that they are 3 years old is a better determiner of whether or not they will graduate from high school than any other variable that ended up in their particular context. So that makes sense. I don't feel like I'm saying it very well. That from birth to age 3, so many of the markers for success had already sort of been determined, that what he found was that was the most effective way of doing ministry within that age range, rather than working with kids later. Because what he found is that when you work with them later, what you're doing is you're ending up having to kind of work with and perhaps undo some of the family systems that have already sort of been set and been done. But when you work within that family unit, whatever context that family looks like, you know, whatever set of human beings are put around that child, when you work within that unit, that can actually have better outcomes in the long term for successful, not just successful ministry, but successful education and successful career and all of the marks of success that we would say within our American culture. And I thought that was a really interesting study that he was a part of, because so much of what we focus on is Sunday school, right? And that starts at about school age, so 5. So by the time that kids are 5, they have already sort of missed those key places. And how do we find those key places? We can't just sort of take the 0 to 3-year-old out of the construct of the family. It's impossible to do that. And so somehow family ministry, especially within this really early stage of family ministry, somehow needs to gain a greater weight within our churches. And I don't know a lot of ways that is successful right now. I know of ways that it is working within people who have more of a nuclear family, traditional family, where the mom stays at home. There's a lot of programs for moms who stay at home, and there's a lot of ways that moms who stay at home can be connected to larger communities. But typically, those are not the families that need the most help. And so it's figuring out how, that's one of the questions that I sort of have, is how do we reach out to families who have 0 to age 3 children, where both of the parents are at work, and they're relying more heavily on the community to raise the child. The third thing that, and this also ties into sticky faith and baptism, and then I'll be done after this. The third piece that I wanted to highlight is basically sort of reclaiming what we say in our baptism vows. That, when we bring our children forward for baptism, we say that we will help to raise them, and that we further seek to surround them continually with Christian love and care, that they may live as Christ commands. And then we send them out of the church and we say, "See ya." So I'm wondering how we can engage our vows and really live into the call to be the family of God in the way that we hear about it a little bit more in the New Testament, and in the way that the Old Testament we see the whole people of God formed. How do we include children? I feel even troubled by the fact that we have to say it that way. By definition, people are all ages. How do we become the full family of God and not broken out by all of our developmental needs and all of that kind of stuff? I see how we've got to this place, especially the Reformed tradition, I think, has brought us here, unfortunately, more than any other tradition. But we've got to this place, and now we're realizing that it's fraught with some complications. And we've got to figure out how to still uphold our values and let go of some of this developmental stuff that we've got ourselves tied into, and once again assemble as the whole people of God. And I think that can be done as in worship. It doesn't have to be limited to worship. It can be done in community context. It needs to be done in our ministry. It sort of needs to be a question that we wrestle with at every level. And it doesn't mean that we need to be overly intentional about it. I think that sometimes when we get a little overly intentional about, okay, well, this is a family event, then by definition what we do is we exclude those who don't fit that nuclear family context. And that's, I guess, why I wanted to identify the problems with the whole term of family. So we do need to have family events, but they need to be inclusive of the whole community, of all ages, of all ranges. And the more that we can live towards that, I feel like the more beneficial that it actually is for everybody. I recently gave a talk at our family camp, which definitely fits into this whole nuclear family idea and all that kind of stuff. But so I gave the talk at family camp, and one of my goals was to make sure that it was done in a way that could be accessible from all of the generations, no matter how old they were. And how that kind of ended up playing out, and I don't think it would work in all contexts, was by sort of having the feel of a children's sermon. I don't think it was a children's sermon, because I did have a lot of adults afterwards come and say, that was actually really good. But I did it in a way so that I brought the kids forward, and I had it completely accessible so that everybody could engage and talk about it. That was one way that I felt like we can do that. I think that communion is a better way of doing that. It's hard to access the whole piece of sermon, I think, becomes complicated when we talk about family, because there are things that adults can talk about that kids can't. But the table brings us all together. And the music brings us all together. There are plenty of places where we can all be brought together as the family of God, all together. It's really important, and I think all of us would recognize this here, for our children to be interacting with teenagers and young adults. I want them and older people, I want them to know that I'm not the only person who believes this. And furthermore, that they can see somebody who looks a little bit like somebody that they might see on TV. Because, I mean, every young adult, I feel like, is a little bit cool to some degree, you know? And so I want them to feel like, okay, that person believes this person believes this person believes that. And to put that all together, it gives them, it paves the road for them. In a way that we can't do as mother and father or mother and partner. And when all of that responsibility is put back on the parents, it's overwhelming and it feels a little bit unbearable. There is a lot that parents need to be able to do. There for sure is a lot that parents need to be able to do, but it's not the job exclusively of parents to raise children of faith. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Dani.